Joining me now is the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin. And welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Great to be here with you. Thank you.
Can you say flatly that Congress will pass this tax plan this week and send it to the president to sign before Christmas?
I can. It's a historic moment, and we're excited to be here.
And you have no doubts that Congress will pass it this week?
I have no doubt. This has been a terrific process with the House and Senate working together in conference, and there's a terrific bill that's going to get to the president to sign.
All right. Let's run through several aspects of this terrific bill, as you put it. And the first one I want to deal with is fairness. Here's what Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer had to say about it this week.
God bless wealthy people. I'm glad we have them. But they don't need a tax break.
Let me pick up on that, because critics note the tax rate for top earners drops from 39.6% to 37%. The corporate tax rate is cut from 35% to 21%, and the owners of so-called pass-through companies get a 20% deduction. The Tax Policy Center analyzed the earlier Senate bill, which did not even have all of those provisions, and said the top tenth of 1% of taxpayers would get 42% of the benefits. Question, Mr. Secretary, do wealthy Americans need all of those tax breaks?
Well, Chris, first of all, the reason why we're lowering the top rate is because we're getting rid of lots and lots of deductions. And there's a big part of the country that has state and local taxes that we're getting rid of. Matter of fact, Schumer's been complaining about taxes going up on rich people in New York. So it's just not the case that there's all those taxes going to rich people.
And what about all the other aspects of it and the analysis for the Tax Policy Center, 42% of the benefits to the top 1%?
Well, I don't agree with those numbers. What this is all about is middle-income tax cuts. Matter of fact, I researched, you grew up in Chicago, the median person, family that makes $50,000 is going to get extra money back, close to $2,000, and a family making $150,000 in Illinois is going to get over $4,000 back. That's very meaningful, and people are going to see these tax cuts starting in February because we have the IRS already working on new tax tables.
But again, just to push this question of fairness, and I take your point that because of the fact that you're doing away with most of the state and local deductions, that's going to be a tax increase for people in high tax states like New York or California. But still, we're talking about a family that makes over $600,000 a year. Do they need to have their taxes cut from 39.6% to 37%? And in the so-called pass-throughs, because of the deduction that you're going to give them, you're going to get a situation where a lot of the employees who work for those companies will be taxed at a higher rate than their bosses.
Well, let me just say, pass-throughs are the engine of growth in this country. And this is about creating the lowest tax rate for pass-throughs since the 1930s. That is going to be massive, massive economic growth. And it's about fixing a broken business tax system. We've had one of the highest corporate rates in the world, with companies leaving trillions of dollars offshore so that they don't have to pay taxes. This is a historic event to fix a broken tax system.
But what about the point I just made, that you could end up with employees of these pass-throughs? And these are companies that are not formal corporations, and the owners of them end up paying their taxes through the individual tax rate, not the corporate tax rate. The idea that you could have employees paying at a higher tax rate than the owners of those companies.
Chris, you know, it's a very complicated tax system, and this is about simplifying it. So the reason why we have the pass-through tax break is because we believe there'll be about $4,500 in wage growth that will go back to workers. So this is all about creating a tax system that's good for workers, good for working families.
Let's talk about the point you just brought up, because that was one of the other aspects that was a big selling point, that you're going to be making the tax code simpler. And in fact, there was an event that I want to show where President Trump met with top congressional leaders and talked about this is going to be so simple, you're going to be able to file your tax return on a postcard. Take a look.
Postcard.
Great job. Thank you very much. I didn't know I was going to be given a prop.
But analysts say that, in fact, the GOP tax plan, you didn't end up cutting out all of those deductions, makes the tax system more complicated for millions of Americans, especially those involved in these pass-through companies who are going to have an even more complicated tax system to deal with and are not going to have any chance of looking at filing on a postcard.
Chris, that's just not the case. I couldn't be happier overseeing the IRS. Over 90% of Americans are going to fill out taxes on that postcard or a virtual electronic postcard. This is about simplifying taxes and simplifying the business system. So there will always be people who complain that are losing tax breaks, but this is about making it simple for the American public.
I want to press on that because that's a new number. I'd heard that originally, but you're still saying over 90% of Americans will be able to file on a postcard.
Absolutely. They'll take the standard deduction, and that's what they'll file with. And we're in the process already of designing new forms so that Americans don't have thousands of pages of tax forms.
Let's turn to the deficit. Your Treasury Department issued a one-page statement this week that was pretty controversial. You said the combination of tax cuts, rollback of regulations, infrastructure, and welfare reform will not only pay for tax reform, but reduce the debt net by $300 billion over 10 years. But the nonpartisan Joint Committee of Taxation, the analysts for the Congress, say even assuming growth, the tax plan adds $1 trillion to the deficit. And the head of the Committee for a Responsible Budget says that no one should believe the one-page statement that your Treasury Department put out.
Chris, I've been through these numbers, so let me walk you through them before. Okay, they're rather simple. Okay, first of all, we've said all along that the joint tax numbers underestimate growth. So they predict about $500 billion of growth. There's $1.5 trillion of tax cuts. There's $500 billion that are the difference between policy and baseline. That takes us down to $1 trillion. If you look at the other $500 billion that joint tax agrees, that gets you down to $500 billion. Their growth numbers are just too low. By the way, the Obama administration in the first 4 years predicted GDP of 3%. When they left, they predicted GDP of 2.2%. Now everybody is saying we can't have 3%. We've had 3%. What Treasury put out is consistent with what I've said. The difference between 2.9, which is our conservative number, and 2.2 is over $1.8 trillion. And that's what the report shows.
Now, the president, as he was on the South Lawn on Friday, started talking about, I guess it was yesterday when he was on the South Lawn, said 4, 5, 6% growth. You don't really believe that, do you?
I think we could have quarters of 4, 5, 6% growth. I don't think we'll have that over 10 years, and that wasn't what the president meant, but we will have periods of high growth. We've already seen it if it weren't for the hurricane.
And you think that this tax bill is going to turbocharge the economy to that extent?
Absolutely. You've already seen this. You see the stock market at record highs. You see average workers that see their 401ks go up. They already have more money for savings. They're going to get more money in their pockets. This is going to be the largest change in fixing a broken tax system that we've ever had. People said we couldn't do it. We will do it, and I couldn't be more excited to see the president sign it this week.
In the time we have left, I want to talk to you about two other issues. President Trump is going to release his national security strategy tomorrow, and there are reports that in it he will accuse China of engaging in, quote, economic aggression. How is China an economic aggressor, and are we headed for a trade war with Beijing?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of it, but I have been working with the president on it. I was with the president and vice president at dinner last night at Camp David, and he's excited to give the speech tomorrow. And China, we are in economic competition with China. As the president has said, we don't have fair trade. We have a big trade deficit. He's made that very careful discussions with President Xi. We want to have a more balanced and fair trade relationship with China.
But is it going too far to call them an economic aggressor? And doesn't that lead to the potential for a trade war?
I'm not going to comment on what's specifically in the speech. I would say this isn't about trade wars. This is about reciprocal fair trade. And if we have to protect American workers and put on tariffs or other things where they don't have fair trade with us, the president will do that.
So you're laying open the door to new tariffs on China?
I think we've said that we will look at where they are not having fair trade. We will look at whatever means we need to combat that for the American workers.
Finally, the federal government is due to run out of money on Friday. Will Congress find a way to keep the government funded, or can you rule out a shutdown the 2 days before Christmas?
I can't rule it out, but I can't imagine it occurring. I would expect that both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, understand that if they can't agree on this, they need to have another short-term extension to move this to January. We can't have a government shutdown in front of Christmas.
What would the impact be if there were a government shutdown?
I'm not even going to comment on the impact. I just can't imagine sending government workers home for Christmas. So I hope that Congress gets this done.
Final question, as somebody who's relatively new to Washington, when you talk about a 2-week extension, another 2-week extension, is this any way to run a government?
Well, that's something we'll talk more about, Chris. Hopefully we'll look at reforms for different things next year.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. I appreciate that you take our questions and you answer them directly. Secretary Mnuchin, thank you. Thanks for coming in. Always good to talk with you, sir.
Great to be here. Thank you.